Hello everyone. So in this one we're going to look how we can use particles to simulate body of water. In more particular, we will look into making a waterfall. Okay, so let's jump right into it. First step is to make a box. I'm going to make a box around that big, this tall. And this is going to be where the water will be coming from, like a base, and the water will be just falling down right here. Okay, I want this to be 32 segments long to 32 segments width, and we should probably, there you go, turn that on, F4. Okay, so next thing I want to do is actually make a slope. So I'm going to go press Q. Oh yes, right click, convert to editable poly to do any further modifications. Okay, select wrong tool. Let's try that again. There you go. And it doesn't work, right here. Okay. And now I'm going to just angle it down, just like that. This should be okay. Alright, then I actually want to kind of cut out a little path for water to, little canal for the water to flow in. So I'm going to go to soft selection and use soft selection. Then I will switch my selection tools to the spray and going to ignore back facing. And let's see what I can do with this one. There you go. Play around with that a little bit. I want the bubbly effect, so this should do. And let's see, fall off. This looks pretty good. Okay, select W, press down. Even more. Whoop. That's good. Okay, once we have that, we have a base for the water to basically flow in, and this is where it's going to start. Alrighty, so once we have this, we can actually go and start making particles. So to do that, we are going to go to our creation tab, then we're going to click here and select particle systems. For this example, we'll be using P-array. There's a couple different ones, but this one works quite well with making water. And we're going to just drag along and make a little box. This is kind of a visual for the P-array to apply all the modifiers to it and links as it will be necessary later on. So this is not going to be rendered, this is just kind of for you to work with, so you don't have to worry about it being rendered. Okay, another thing I can do actually here is to kind of smooth out the edges around, just so it looks a little more realistic here. Okay, I'm going to go to Customize, Show UI, Show Ribbon. Okay. Then I'll go into Modify tab, select Edges, and I'm going to go to Freeform, Relax, Soften. For this one, I believe, let's see here, we can make this size 40 and 1. Not sure what happened. 40, 1.7. There you go, and just kind of like smooth out the edges a little bit. That looks a little bit better than before. Okay. Once this is done, I will start talking about the actual PRA. So to work with this, we need what is called emitter. We need basically an object that will generate the particles. So I am going to go to Create tab, select Standard Primitives, and make a plane. Just make some sort of plane like this. And I'm going to position it at the origin where we want the water to come from, where we want the water to be generated. So in this case, it will be right on the top. You can turn on angle snap. There you go. Go up. Make it a little bit narrower. That's pretty good. Okay. Move it back a little. Angle. Yeah, that's not too bad. It can be played around with even more, but I think this will do for now. Just making sure that corners are not hidden. That should be okay. Okay, so this is going to be our emitter. So far nothing happens. We just have the PRA. To actually make this plane generate particles, we click on our PRA object. Then we're going to go to Modify tab. Then we will select Pick Object. Click on that, select our plane. Done. And you can kind of see it already generating some particles. They're kind of those little pluses here you can see. So I'm going to move the slider along the frames, and you can see those. If I zoom out a little, it's easier to see. You can see them being generated. Okay, but there's still many more things to do because they just like kind of shoot out. They're nothing like water yet. We'll make it water. So next step is just a bunch of tweaking. Basically, we're still selecting the PRA, the box. We're going to go to the rotation and collision. I think. No, where's the thing I'm looking for is particle generation. There you go. That's the first kind of sub-menu that we see on the PRA. And the very first parameter is use rate. So this is kind of how many particles are being generated at once. We increase this number, there will be more particles generated at once, and we have to be kind of careful how many particles we generate, because otherwise the whole thing will start freezing up and it will be unbearable. So for this one we'll go 20. 20 should be enough for what we want to achieve. So we have a little bit more particles being generated right now. Now the second parameter is speed. So basically how fast the particles are moving along the way. For this one I believe I'll go to 2 should be okay. Then variation, that's basically how the difference of speeds of particles. So we specified the speed right here, and then this will be a variation. So some particles will be slower than the others and some will be faster. To make this a consistent flow, I found that 40% of variation is actually pretty good for this, what we want to do. Then we have divergence. This is basically the spread of particles, as you can see. Let's change the color of this because this is pretty bright to something that is sure. Okay. Alright. So you can see now, I'm going to select my PRA again, and I'm going to move this. You can see that the particles are kind of spreading around, like they're not really following the same path. So this is divergence. I want it to be 0. Okay, and the next parameter, the next submenu we're going to look for is particle timing. Emit start. This is when the frame at which the particles are started being generated. and it is currently to 0, and this is what we want. Emit stop is when the frame, so frame 30, there's nothing degenerated anymore. So this is where the generation stops. What I want for this is for the particles to be generated all the way along the keyframes. I'm going to first increase the amount of frames. I'm going to go to time configuration right in the corner and do length 300, just so we have a little bit more frames to work with. Then I'm going to go back here and do this and emit stop at 300. Display until. This is basically, so the particles are being generated, but at 100 they're kind of disappearing. So this also needs to be 300 to be visible throughout all the 300 frames. And life is basically how long each particle will be visible for. So right now it's set to 30, which means that from the moment when it's being generated, it will be 30 keyframes, and for 30 frames it will be visible, and then it's going to disappear. So I want kind of the water to fall down and around here. I'll have to play around with it. For now I'll set it to, I would say, 55. We'll see how that works later on. Okay, the next thing we have here is particle size. So this is basically how big the particles will be. Right now we're actually not viewing the particles. If you go to here, this submenu, you can see viewport display, and we're at ticks right now. There are dots as well, but what we really kind of want, if we want to see how it's going to look like, is mesh, and that will give us visualization how it's actually going to look like. And those are all little, well, I guess you could say little objects that are being generated. And also what you have to know here is that we are displaying only 10% of the total particles, and this is just to make everything smoother and avoid the program to be choppy. If we do it 100, this is actually the real reflection of how many particles there will be generated and how kind of it's going to look like. So we are going to switch it back to 10 just to avoid this freezing up. Okay, so let's move to the next thing here. Variation, right, variation, same thing. How the life of the particle will vary slightly. I don't want that. The water doesn't really magically disappear, so I'm just going to leave it at 0. The next thing we're going to take a look at is, oh yes, particle size. I need to set that up to 15. 15 was actually what I went with, and that was pretty good. And now you can see that there's just a bunch of triangles coming out of the being generated from the emitter, and this is also not something what we would like to do. That's why the next submenu here is particle type. If you open that up, it gives you a couple different types of the particles you might have. You can actually, this is really cool, object fragments. You can make an object and then emit those objects from the plane. So like kind of for different effects. For example, bullets. Like if you want to model a bullet and then just shoot out a bunch of bullets from the emitter, that's what we want. But for the water, we're actually going to go with metaparticles. Those are kind of random kind of blobby looking things, and they're pretty good for water. So we selected this, and then tension. Tension's kind of interesting parameter. It's kind of how clumped these objects or these particles will be. So if we go lower, it will be, I think, if we go higher, it's going to be clumped up more. Yeah, there you go. So this is kind of the parameter you want to play around with, just to see to achieve the desired effect, whatever you want to do. Kind of have to play around with that one. Okay. The next thing we're going to do, let's see, down the list, object fragment controls. I believe that is rotation. There's a bunch of other parameters here, but I'm not going to go through them yet. Okay, so we can go take a look how this is actually going to look like. So this is kind of what I have so far, and I'm thinking that the volume is a little bit too large. I don't actually need that big stream of the water going down. So I'm going to go back and perhaps I can, let's see, size, let's do size 12. Okay, size 12, and then we can increase the tension if we want, 2.5. Just kind of have to play around with it and see what's working and what is not. I'll leave that for now, then I will probably go back and change it even more. So we have kind of this effect, but as you can see, it's shooting out from a straight line, basically from the emitter. Wherever the normals are facing, it's going to follow the path and will kind of never stop. So what we want actually is this water to flow down. So what we have to do is we need to introduce gravity. There's no gravity yet, and that's why the water is doing it. So to do that, we're going to go to our Create tab. Then we're going to go to Space Warps and select Forces, and we have a thing here called Gravity. We're going to go ahead and select that, and then just draw this little plane that is just symbol for the gravity. Then we are seeing the parameters here: force strength 1, that's default, basically Earth's gravitational force. Decay, we don't want any. Okay, so we do have a gravity, but then nothing's going to happen. The particles are not being affected just because it's not linked to the P array here. And so the next step is actually to link this gravity to the P array so that the particles generated are being affected. We're going to go right here, so click this third button, and then connect these two. Once we do that, we should get the water just flowing down. And it actually is flowing down, as you can see, or cannot see. It's a little harder to see here, but yeah, so basically now water is just going straight through our base, right through, and just going down. So another thing to do is we have to kind of prevent this water to going through the object. For that, we're going to use something called Deflectors, and I believe it's the same menu. Yeah, there you go. If we select Deflectors now, there are a couple different types. The two that I'm interested in are the U-Deflector and Deflector itself. The U-Deflector basically binds a deflector or turns an object into a deflector. So this whole plane, or this whole object that I modeled, will be a deflector, meaning that every single sides of it will be basically holding the water, holding the particles, and they will be actually flowing down as such. So, and then there's also a deflector, which is basically you can draw a plane. It will not be rendered, and it will basically serve as a barrier, like invisible barrier, so that the particles will stop when they hit it and perhaps rebound depending what kind of parameters you set. As you can see, all the deflectors have different options here, and the one we actually will be interested in changing is bounce. The bounce is set to 1 right now. That means that if particles will hit the deflector, they will actually bounce out of it. We don't want that because that's not how the natural behavior of water, so we'll be changing that to 0. Okay, so to do that, we're going to click on U-Deflector and just draw it out as any other object of this type, and then we are going to, okay, it's selected, pick object. That's what we need to select, and then we just click the object that we want to make a deflector, which is in this case our model of drowned or the canal. Okay, so if we look, the water is going still through it. That is because we need to bound the deflector into the P array so that it is being affected. So basically we're bounding this whole model to the P array so that the particles can now flow down along it. So we're going to go again, third button, bind to space warp, and connect these two together. And now if we take a look, the water is actually flowing down. There you go. So one thing that I see immediately is that I need to increase the life of every single particle because they kind of end here and I want it to flow down. So I'm going to go to P array, modify P array, and then I'm going to change life to 70 perhaps. That should work. Change it back to ticks, and ooh, I'm still at 100%, that is not good. Change it to 10. And now I can kind of see the behavior. And this is what I'm talking about. You can see the pluses just bouncing once they hit my object. So I need to change the bounce to 0. Once I do that, you can see that it's a little more natural flow of water. And let's see, I'm interested in seeing how far down it goes. Okay, that's way too far. So I need to go down back to P array, change the live to 60, and see how that's going to affect it. So I think 60 a little bit better. It's still, okay, that's weird. 50. I'll leave that for now. I might come back to it later and tweak it more. I think if I go to 100% again and look at mesh, I may want to increase the size of particles. Let's leave that at 20 and see. Okay, so you can see kind of some gaps around, and okay, so I want to change the size. I'll go to 14. See how that looks like. That looks a little bit better. And also, what I forgot to do is, we are still in the P array option menu. There is one parameter that I skipped. That's right. Size variation. That's a variation in size. I don't want any. This is what I'm trying to. That's what I was looking for. So we have grow for. This is when the particle gets generated from the emitter. It's not going to be as of its original size as intended. It's going to be much smaller, and then over time it's going to turn into the desirable size, and that's going to take 10 frames. I want it to be size 14 from the very beginning, so I'm going to set that to 0. And as you can see, that looks much better. And then fade 4 also 0. So that's when the particle is just about to die. It's also going to get smaller. I don't want that either. So now we have kind of a better looking water. Change that to 10. Okay, and then I can do ticks, no problem. Okay, so another trick that that you can apply yourself is you can go to create, and under space warps, those invisible deflectors that I was talking about, if you kind of have this wavy pattern for your water to flow in, sometimes water goes and jumps up because of the sides. If you want it to follow exactly the way you want it to follow, you can make deflectors and put them invisible deflectors along the sides here, so that the particles will not go through it, they will not jump out of the path, and they will just flow smoothly down. Another way is actually assigning splines and assigning particles to move along a spline. So you can just draw whatever you want and it will follow exactly that spline. So there's a couple ways. Okay, so I think we're almost done. So we have this effect going on here. The next step will be probably to just apply a couple textures and tweak it farther if you are not unhappy with the result.